Music is the highest radiologic resolution. Music is the attack pattern, the cortical warhead, the synaptic counterattack, the rendezvous sequence, the interstellar matrix. Resistance is futile. Music is the long-range scanner, the artificial similarity, the temporal compensator, the antimatter reaction. Music is the transport corridor. Music is...
Hey guys, Dilby here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I've got an awesome tutorial for you. This one's long overdue and I've had a lot of requests for it. We're doing Afro House. I'm talking about music in the style of artists like Pablo Fiierro and me, Simona Vitello, labels like Mo Black, Rise, Wired, kind of music, you know the type of thing. Afro House is quite diverse, you know, it can kind of range from like organic house all the way through to kind of melodic house and techno. But the common theme is a combination of ethnic samples and really groovy organic drums and percussion. As always, the project files are available for download. There's a link in the description so you can go there and grab the whole Ableton project. This way you can get a bit of a deeper understanding as to how I've put everything together. Anyway, let's do some Afro House.
Music is no longer irrelevant.
Alright guys, here we are inside Ableton and this is the project I've put together for Afro House. This one's a bit more detailed and I tried to really distill it down, but I felt that all of these elements were somehow necessary. That said, it's probably going to run a little bit longer than usual, but I'll try to go through each element as quickly as possible and explain it in a clear and concise way. If you'd like to look into things in a bit more detail, then you can grab the project file from the link in the description. The point of giving access to the project files is to help consolidate your learning and your understanding of what goes into making it. So that said, let's have a listen to the beat that I've done.
All therapeutic properties. Music is the highest radiologic resolution. Music is the attack pattern, the cortical warhead, the synaptic counterattack, the rendezvous sequence, the interstellar matrix. Resistance is futile. Music is the long-range scanner, the artificial similarity, the temporal compensator, the antimatter reaction. Music is the transport corridor. Music is my weapon. Our weapons are offline. Resistance is futile. All drones will comply.
So you can probably see as we were going along and I was skipping through how many elements there are in there. As always, we'll start with the drums. So here's the kick. So it's quite a clean kick with a pretty clear knock on the top. I just got this from a sample pack and I've just rolled off a little bit of the unnecessary sub-frequencies. I'm automating this filter to cut out some of the subs to create emphasis in the break. It's a kick. What more is there to say? So in this project, I've used a cowbell instead of a clap. One of the things I really enjoy about this style is that you've got the opportunity to be a bit more creative with your sound choice. So instead of using a standard clap, so you can see in the MIDI, I've got it playing two hits. The second one is lower in velocity. This kind of gives the implication of a delay, and that kind of freedom to be creative. So I've avoided really enjoyable to write on. So let's take a look at the hats. I've based this around this main shaker. You can see the MIDI here. What's happening is I've got a kind of main hit happening on the offbeats, and then I've got these other ones which are kind of creating that shuffled groove. This is actually built up from one sample that I've copied onto 3 drum rack cells, and I've got slightly different start times on the sample, and then the MIDI plays them in different positions and different velocities. So if I solo this one, it's kind of like a regular open hat. And if I solo these two, they're shorter and giving this kind of groove aesthetic. And then all together, it gives more of a humanized, real shaker feel. To accompany that shaker, I've got this groove shaker. What I did here is basically took a whole bunch of shaker samples, threw them into a drum bus, and played around, just experimenting with random positions. So you can see there's some bits that are repetitive and some bits that are a bit more random. What I was looking for here is different textures and sounds. It's quite low in the mix, so it just kind of creates some interest and variation with the first shaker. You can see it starting to form a groove in that high end. Next, I've got two tambourines. This one is more light and open sounding, and I've got a reverb on there with quite a bit of wet signal, and this is to kind of push it into the back and make it feel more airy and atmospheric. This tam groove one is a bit more of a short and hard sound, and I've got a bit of delay on that to make it more atmospheric. So all of those elements with the kick, so you can see they're all working well together to create a strong groove in the high end. Finally, I've got this rolling hat. Now I'll show you the MIDI, as seeing this will explain a bit about what you're hearing. So the velocity on this is rising over every beat, and it gives it a really distinct feel. You'll definitely recognize it from Afro house tracks. So it's really emphasizing that 4th 16th, as opposed to the main shaker, which is emphasizing every 3rd 16th. So let's hear that all together in context. And then with the main shaker, and then with the clap, cowbell. So there's a lot of shuffle, a lot of groove, really interesting, and it sounds quite complex, although you can see that it's really not that complex. But all of the sounds are chosen to work well and complement each other, and they're placed in a way that all adds value to the groove. Now, despite being a percussion-heavy style, I've actually got very little going on in the percussion group here. I've got this drum, which I don't know how to pronounce, kasisi, but you'll definitely recognize the sound. So let's take a listen to that in context, and you'll see, again, it's really reinforcing the groove. Cool, right? Now I've got this thing I've called tap loop. Cool loop, something I found from a sample pack. I actually tried to remake it using a couple of bongo conga rim shots. It just didn't quite sound right to me, so I went with the original loop. But this is something that I'll do a lot. I'll find a loop, decide which elements I like from it, and then recreate it. It makes the process of coming up with new ideas really quick, but it means that in the end I've got something that's more unique. So this loop is only happening in the break, and it's really just to kind of create some drama and interest. I do have one more percussive element, and I've put it in the bass group. So let's have a listen to this low perk. So a really strong, bold element doing the job of a bass line. This has got quite a bit of sub on it, and I've used an EQ to just kind of push up some of the upper mids to help it cut through the mix. I do have another bass, which is playing the same notes. This is called bass groove. I've used a wavetable with a sub. I've added a bit of harmonics to the sub with the tone. And then I have added on an oscillator here, oscillator 1, which is playing a sawtooth. I've then cut away the upper harmonics with a filter to make it really nice and tight, and I'm using this envelope 2 to automate the filter frequency and make it really nice and plucky. Without the filter, I've got that sent to some reverb and some delay. A lot of people will tell you don't put reverb and delay on your bass. Both of these are being cut, so the subs are not being affected. Something that's really interesting with this percussion, this rack here, I've split the signal into sub and mids. In the subgroup, I've got a sidechain that is being compressed by the signal from this bass groove. So every time this bass hits, you'll see the compressor duck. That way I'm not doubling up the signal in the sub-frequencies. The mids, however, are being unaffected by the sidechain, so that way it gives this nice percussive, organic top to the bass line. The drum sound is also tuned to play the same notes as the bass line. You'll notice this utility and LFO here. What this is doing is shifting it around in the panorama. The actual sample is quite stereo, and it gave a kind of unbalanced feeling to the track when it was all the way on one side. So this is just a way to shift it around the panorama. You'll notice afterwards I've got another utility which is controlling the width and bringing it closer to the center. On the subgroup, I've also got a utility which is completely monoing the sub signal. So in the context with the drums, creating a really strong rolling groove. Now I've got this long bass or sub bass. So this is a very classic sound. It's called a Reese bass, and I've got this from a preset on Anna 2. It is actually, however, a quite simple sound to make. It's made from saw waves with a bunch of voices that are detuned to give it a wide unison sound. Then you use a filter to cut away all of the upper harmonics. The MIDI here is playing a progression in G minor. That's the key of the track. And you'll notice that these notes here and here overlap slightly and create this kind of pitch bend effect. This just adds a bit more texture to the sound and kind of makes it a bit more unique and interesting. One thing you may have noticed from the bass MIDI is that it's playing on D, and I said the key of the track is in G. D is actually the perfect fifth of G, so this way it's playing out of the way of this bass line, but still going to be harmonically working with the rest of the track. So there are some chord elements in the track, and writing chords is not my strong suit. So I've used these notes from the sub bass as the foundation of the chords. When I write chords, this is pretty much how I always do it. I build a bass progression that I feel like works well, and then I'll extrapolate that into chords on top. So with that in mind, let's move on to some of the melodic elements. I have this pad here. So we can see the MIDI is exactly the same as the sub bass. I've just taken this and duplicated it up an octave. This is just to increase the harmonic content and give it some more high end. The patch is literally just a preset from Ableton, and I'm using this EQ to cut away a bunch of the lower harmonics. There's a lot of information in the mids in this track, so I just wanted this pad to be kind of bright and airy and add another reinforcing layer to the chord progression. I've used some overdrive and some chorus to add a bit more texture and width to the sound and help it to sit in the mix. It just sounds a bit more fizzy and atmospheric. Then I'm sidechaining it with LFO tool. I've got this atmospheric string Atmos. Very low in the mix, just a nice ethereal sound. It's just adding some harmonics and texture as a kind of background element. I want this to be quite thin and in the background, so I'm using heavy EQ to just sit it in the mix. I'm adding a bit of erosion and chorus, similar to the other pad, to just give it a bit more texture. And then of course I'm sidechaining it to the kick. Next, let's take a look at the piano. It's made up of 2 layers. They're both playing Korg M1, and they're a combination of chords that are built from this sub bass. So let's take a look at the MIDI on this one, and in solo. So this is playing the same notes as the sub bass. I've just shifted around the voicing of some of the chords. Then this next layer is adding a bit more texture and adding some variation by playing notes that aren't in the bass pattern. Let's take a listen to both. So these are both really simple sounds, just made up from different presets on the Korg M1. I'm then grouping them together and adding some presets to kind of thin out the sound and sit it in the mix. This helps to push it into the background a bit and give space for the other elements. What I'm using it for is to add some kind of emotion and drama. So within the arrangement context, it's really making a moment in the break. It helps to go from this kind of fun, energetic groove into like a deep, atmospheric, emotive moment for the break. The final melodic element is this pluck line. So this is a super simple patch that I've built using an Ableton analog. It's two saw waves which are slightly detuned to one another. It's going through a very tight filter with quite an aggressive filter envelope to give it that plucky sound. Without the filter, within the synthesis, it's got a noise oscillator, but I felt like the noise was getting lost because the filter is so aggressive. So I've added this vocoder set to noise and a little bit of wet signal. So this is just helping to give a bit more of that kind of grit and noise back to the sound. I've then got an EQ just rolling off the sub frequencies, a glue compressor to control the dynamics. Then I'm using this pedal to add in a bit more harmonic overtones, a chorus to spread it out wide, a flanger to make it sound a bit more interesting. So I'll play it and turn those on as we go. So each one does a little job to help to make it more interesting and more rich sounding. They're all quite subtle, but when used in combination, they really help to develop the sound. Next, I've got this echo, which is creating this kind of slap back to the sound. I've got the ducking turned on so that each time the synth plays, it actually ducks out the taps on the echo, the feedback. In the context of this break, I'm automating the filter cutoff. This helps to give this kind of like rising atmosphere and create tension and release in the break. I'm also sending it to a really large reverb. Then when it comes back in the drop, I've cut away the frequencies again. So it goes from being really open and bright to really tight and back in the mix. So automating those kind of dynamics in your sound really helps to kind of open your track up, create moments and create drama and tension and release. It also means you don't have to rely heavily on effect samples, uprises, crashes, that type of thing. That said, let's talk about the effects. So I've got a crash, which is literally just a crash sample. It's got some delay built into it. I didn't have to do any work. Fantastic. Saves me time. I've got a little snare fill. Technically a percussive element, but I put it into the effects group in case I want to filter the percussion or affect it in some way. And I want this snare fill to be unaffected. I've got a percussion fill. This has got some overdrive on it to just kind of bring up the sound, make it a bit more rich and harmonic, and it's being sent to a reverb. I've got a djembe fill. Same thing again with the overdrive and the reverb. I've got this reverse sweep sound, which is being sent to a delay, which helps to create a bit more atmosphere. I've got this group of verb snares. So this is just snares that have got reverb added onto them. You could easily make them yourself, but I got these from my sample pack. Link up here. Technically that one's a clap, but yeah. Then I've got this noise riser, also from my sample pack. And finally I've got this atmosphere. Some kind of vinyl crackle or something, which adds a bit more texture to the background of the track. It's more apparent if I play it just with the drums. So let's have a listen to some of those effects in context with the track. And at the end here, I'll just turn off this pluck. So they're really simple effects, nothing too crazy, just helping to transition the energy from one point in the track to another. And having these different textures of drum fill help to add to the percussion of the track and give it that organic Afro feel. Now the vocals, I've got this background vocal, which is quite cool. It's doing something similar to the Atmos loop. Just like a field recording, and you'll notice here I've put it into an uneven loop. So that means that it's changing position all the way through the track, which helps to keep it interesting and kind of feel like something's moving and progressing throughout the composition. So let's have a listen to that with the drums. So it really adds another layer of kind of complexity and interest to the track. Now this vocal is a sample that I've found. This is not my intellectual property, so it won't be included in the download. But I just felt like it really fit well with the composition. The vocals in Afro House can be quite varied in style. They can be from like ethereal sung female vocal, something ethnic or tribal, to something that might more traditionally be in like a house or deep house track. This one I felt worked well in the context. You'll see here I've got some automation, which is just sending some of these words to a delay.
Stellar matrix. Resistance is futile.
I'll show you the processing. A lot of processing. Compression, I'm monoing it, EQing it quite heavily to shape the sound. It was quite dull before. Controlling the dynamics. I've got a CLA vocals from Waves just on the default preset. Just kind of helps to thicken the vocal up. I've got a de-esser, I've got an echo, and then I've got my vocal rack. Link up here to that video if you want to check it out. So as you can see, all those elements work well together and kind of really build up the essence of the track. Let's take another listen and I'll skip through and give you a little refresher of what's playing when.
Music is no longer irrelevant. Music is the universal language. Music embraces all therapeutic properties. Music is the highest radiologic resolution. Music is the attack pattern, the cortical warhead, the synaptic counterattack, the rendezvous sequence, the interstellar matrix. Resistance is futile. Music is the long-range scanner, the artificial similarity, the temporal compensator, the antimatter reaction. Music is the transport cord. Music is my weapon. Our weapons are offline. Resistance is futile. All drones will comply.
So So in terms of the arrangement, it is a very condensed arrangement, but basically what we're doing in the beginning is adding and introducing the elements. We've got the break where we add some atmosphere and emotion, create some drama, and then we're back into the groove and we're alternating the elements, for example, the piano and the vocal, to create different sections that can be interchanged and help the track feel like it's progressing. I'm also bringing in and out different elements in the hats and the percussion, and this helps to create variation and energy throughout the track. One element that I haven't mentioned is this 16th synth. This was actually what I started making the track with, and in the end I don't think it was adding to the final composition. I thought that it could be cool to use in the breakdown, in the same way that I used this pluck loop. Let's hear it in context with the track. So it's cool, but I felt like in the end it was unnecessary. It wasn't adding enough value to the track. And this pluck loop has a bit more space and a bit more interest and does the same job. But the point here is it's important to try things and they don't have to go to waste. I can always use this in another project.
The rendezvous sequence, the interstellar matrix.
Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that. This was a really fun one for me. I enjoy making this type of music and I've actually released quite a lot of it. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll probably want to check out this one I did about a cool technique for tension and release in this style of music. Anyway, that's it from me today. We'll catch you next time. Peace!
Music is the transport cord. Music is my weapon.